So here's method number 1 for you if you are in a terrible hurry and you'd like to put something pretty on a table to cover a bowl or a cup or anything like that, condiments or whatever. Or if you are giving a gift to somebody and you'd like to make sure it has a pretty top on it. The other method you can use this for, which is brilliant, is for jam jars. So if you want to cover the lid of your jam jars and have them looking really lovely for a fete or a market stall or just as gifts for Christmas, then this is the super quick method, because at the end of the day, a jam jar cover looks nice, but it doesn't actually have to be as long lasting or washable and that as the others. So start off, you can pinking shear your edges, whether you've got pinking shears as in shears, scissors, or whether you have got a roller cutter or rotary cutter with a pinking shear blade in it. Either will do a very similar job. Just go around the edge and make sure the entire thing has been pinked, as we say. Next, you're going to turn it over, and you can still see on mine, you might not be able to, but over here you can see my original size of that disc, that lid that I wanted to make. I need to make it a little bit bigger than that, because that's the top of my bowl or the cup that I'm going to be covering. So I want to attach my elastic much closer to the edge than that. So I'm going to put my elastic on now, very close to the edge. To do that, I put my sewing machine onto a zigzag stitch. I want the zigzag stitch to be sort of a medium width and a medium length. So I'm going to try on my Bernina 1000. It's a 3-ish, between 2 and 3 width, and I'm going to make the length 2.5 to 3. So 2 to 3 on your length and 2 to 3 on your width as well. I then take a piece of elastic. Elastic doesn't matter terribly much what type of elastic. I am simply using corded elastic. This one is probably a 6-cord elastic, and it has a bit of decent stretch to it. But literally you could use any elastic you wanted as long as it wasn't too wide. And in some instances you could also cut that elastic down. So I'm going to place my elastic about 1 centimeter in from my edge, and I'm going to anchor it in place by just turning the needle into the elastic to start with, and I'm going to start sewing onto my elastic. Now once I've got it anchored down, I'm going to gently pull on the elastic to stretch it, but I'm not stretching the fabric. So what I'm doing in effect is it's going to gather my fabric underneath the elastic as I go along. And I'm sewing directly over the top of the elastic. And don't worry, it can go directly over the elastic, or it can catch the fabric down. It should be catching the elastic down at the same time. So we're just going to keep going, and you'll see it'll be curling up more and more as you go. And keep it stretched out at the back and at the front. So always concentrate only on the little bit in front of your needle. So don't worry about what's going on at the back terribly much. Just concentrate on the little piece ahead of your needle. So I'm going to go around the entire circle, the same distance from the edge. When I get back to the beginning over here, I'm going to overlap my elastic about 1 centimeter, and then I'm going to reverse, and I'm going to cut the threads on the machine. And now I've got my elastic here, which has overlapped the beginning. So I'm going to trim that off. And these are amazing. These are my William Whiteley Wilkinson's thread snips, which are an absolute charm. Then snip off your loose threads. You don't want to give away anything. Even if it's for yourself, you should never have little tails of thread on your items. It just looks very tacky and not very professional at all. Now, you can see basically what we've got is a little mob cap, as they used to wear in the olden days. And that is the simplest way you can do this. Now that should stretch over. Sorry, I'm going to just get myself reversed here so I can grab that tub. In fact, I have here my coffee cup. And you can now hopefully see, if I stretch that over there, you've got a very pretty little lid for a jam jar. Very basic. As I said, the edges might start to fray a little bit over time, but for a jam or something that you're giving as a gift, that is a lovely little way to do it. So that is method number 1 for you to do. Method number 2 is very similar in that instead of using pinking shears, you could go around your item with a wider zigzag stitch. Let's do that under the machine. And certainly for the fabrics that are very fine, like this muslin, it's going to curl and pull the seam together. So you will have less fraying, but it will still look very sort of rustic. And it also sometimes on some fabrics will make it wave a little bit as well. You'll get a wavier edge. That's the other way you can do this. If you don't have pinking shears and you want a very quick method to cover a bowl at your next barbecue or an evening event. If you've got an overlocker, it's a great way of using your overlocker. So I just reverse there for a second, clip off my threads, and I will show you on this particular fabric the type of edge you will get, and it's quite cute. Now you have the option to do exactly what I did with the other cover, is to take your elastic, place it a couple of centimeters from the edge. Let me just get this under my machine and hold down my elastic. You need to hold the elastic down with the machine the first few times you do this, so that when you start to pull, it doesn't pull it out of the machine. Now I'm going to keep it the same distance from my edge, my elastic, and I'm going to pull the elastic tight, but I'm going to keep the fabric flat as I go. All I'm trying to do at this point is get a similar distance from the edge. Now, I've got a reasonably good eye, but if you feel that that's not going to work for you, draw a line all the way around your circle where you're going to place your elastic, and then put your elastic onto that, and that'll give you a lovely guide all the way around. And it's more accurate, to be fair, you know. I have it's slightly wider there than I would have liked, but you know what? Hey ho, it'll fit any sized bowl, appropriate bowl. Now, just to make a note here that however far you put your elastic from the edge, you'll get a bigger or smaller frill. So this little one here, I put it very close to the edge, so I've got hardly any frill at all. So it uses less fabric, but honestly, in my opinion, it doesn't look as pretty. These ones where you've left a decent amount of seam between the elastic and the edge give you a really lovely frilly effect. So I'm coming back to the beginning again, and I'm going to just overlap my elastic so it goes back on top of the beginning of the elastic. And I clip that off the machine. And I trim my elastic off. So you can see we don't try and make the elastic fit there. We just go until we, you know, it's done a full circle. We're not going to try and make the elastic the right size to begin with. And there you've got a little mob cap for your bowl. Okay, talking about mob caps, I don't know if any of your children are ever in plays or anything like that, but if they are, this is a fabulous little way to make them a cap for like a granny in Little Red Riding Hood or something along those lines. There you go. Two very quick methods, but basically using the same technique. So you can see how much frillier this is because I've done the elastic a little bit in from the edge. Next technique, let's see. This may or may not fit this pot, just so I can show you, because I didn't make it for this pot, I made it for a smaller bowl. But if I stretch it and you use your imagination, gosh, I haven't got enough hands for this, people. You should be able to get it over your pot or your bowl quite successfully, and that will keep your flies and other midges and things out of your food while you're serving it. So there you go, that's that one done. Now, another technique you can use is your bias tape. A couple of things you can do with the bias tape option is to sew it directly on the edge, or to edge it first and then put your bias tape on. So exactly as you did with the elastic, you can edge this in a rolled hem, you can zigzag it, whatever your preference is. You then place your bias tape down onto here, and then you go all the way around attaching your bias tape. So let's use a large zigzag on this. What I've done is I've increased the width of my zigzag to 4, but the length I'm taking down to be a bit smaller so that it creates a nice little hem for me. It's basically doing a bit of a rolled hem, but not neatly like you get on a machine where you're using the rolled hem foot. But that's the one thing you could do, is a rolled hem foot. But I'm just going to do it this way as a demonstration for you of this technique. So I'm zigzagging all the way around the edge of my fabric. And because it's a lightweight cotton, it does turn under quite nicely. And it hides most of that fraying and that edging. You might get the odd bit that will stick out, but I don't mind that. And this is what it's all about. It's about your personal preference and how neat you want it to look. Trim your ends off before you get there, and go back over the beginning and reverse, and then take it off the machine. I'll just give you a quick look. So that's not a bad edging, considering it's simply zigzagged. Occasionally, as I was saying, you get this sort of little bit of the fluffy edging, but on this side, honestly, it looks perfectly good. So what we're going to do now is edge our work. If you want to be more precise and more careful with where you're placing your bias binding, this is where you could take something like, let's say, for example, a 1/4 inch ruler, and go all the way around and mark off where you're going to place your bias binding. Choose which edge of the bias binding you're making the marking for, and that's what you would do. So I can do that. I'm just going to say approximately 1 centimeter all the way around and mark it off. Obviously, if you need to, do this with a ruler, but I'm fairly confident I know what 1 centimeter or 1/2 inch, I think it is about, looks like. That's going to be the one edge of my biased binding. That's not the middle of the biased binding. So I'm marking that all the way around the edge, the same distance from the edge. So if you have a look, let me just see there. If you have a look on there, I have marked it 1 centimeter or so away. Now I take my biased binding and I turn in the first edge, just fold it under. Doesn't matter how much you fold it under. All you're trying to do is create a nice place for you to put your seam. So I'm going to pop that on there, and to demonstrate for you, I'm going to pin it into position. So I've pinned it now with the edge of the biased binding here on my line. So we're now going to go around this. Just to remind you, because I haven't said that, your bias tape is going to go on the wrong side. Okay, so whatever stitching and thread you're using, make sure you're happy with the color that will show on the right side. So I'm turning my machine back down to a 2.5 stitch length, which is good for sewing on cotton, and straight stitch. So once I have the edge in place and held, I'm now going to gently curve my bias tape around that edge. So this is a great way for you to learn to manipulate bias tape around a circle. Now the first edge, to be fair, is much easier than the second, because as you go around the circle, this edge, which is the convex circle, is going to stretch. And that means that when we do the second row of stitches, it's going to be a concave, which is where it's a little bit more problematic, because you will get tucks or little pleats in your work. So as I'm going, I'm manipulating the bias tape so that it lies against my line. And if necessary, I also adjust my fabric so that it keeps going in a really nice circle, the same distance away. And I'm approaching the beginning again, and when I get near there, I'm going to leave a little gap of about 2 or 3 centimeters, and I'm going to cut my tape off, leaving an extra piece of about 1 centimeter that I can tuck in and line up to butt up against my starting bias tape. So what I'm going to in effect have is a little channel to put my elastic through. So I reverse to end my row. I snip off my stitches, my threads, not just stitches. That won't be any good, will it? Okay, so let me show you where we've got to. Here are my 2 ends, the beginning and the end, which are both tucked under nice and neatly. Now we're going to go back around it the second time to hold down our second edge. This is the concave bit now, and this is where it gets a little bit trickier, because it wants to crease on you. It is going to make little tucks, and that's okay. Wherever it sort of naturally wants to form a tuck, just let it do that. Because it's a bias tape, and the reason it's called bias tape is that it was cut on the bias, which is across the grain, so 45-degree angle to the grain, and that gives it a little bit of extra stretch and flexibility. And that is how it works to go around circles and your armhole edges and things like that very neatly. So what you're learning here is a technique that can be used on garments to put an elastic in a waistband channel for a jumpsuit or a skirt for a child, something like that. So this technique can be used in other methods as well. So I'm just going to reverse back when I'm back at the beginning. I go over the starting stitches and I trim my threads off. Nice and close to my work, without trimming my work obviously. And there we have a seam all the way around, 2 of them, which is the casing for our elastic. There you have it. So you've got a casing that goes all the way around this, and you're now ready to thread your elastic. And in order to do that, you will need a safety pin or a tube threader, which I have not remembered to put amongst the things I need for this tutorial. Wow, yeah, luckily I found one that will work. This is a type of bodkin that you can use for this. I'm going to grab myself a piece of elastic. At this point, don't cut off your elastic, because if it lands up being too short, you'll have to redo it. So what I tend to do is just thread it through my bodkin. Many different types of bodkins. This one you just pull down and it kind of holds it in place. I go to the beginning of my tube and I thread it in, and I keep going and I keep tugging on the end, stretching it out so the elastic goes through the channel. And if it curls up while you're doing it, that's fine, because that's what you want in the end anyway. Keep going until you get back to the beginning or the end, and then you get it out through the hole. At this point, you want to be careful that you don't lose your elastic in the channel. If you do, you just have to start again and rethread it. And with this method, you can decide how much elastic you want and how full you want the curves to be. So the more elastic you have, the less frilly it will be. And the more you have, obviously, the frillier it will be. So I'm going to just say I sort of wanted that length. Trim it off there. Put a little knot in it. And I'm going to do this knot as is it a reef knot? The one that the nurses and doctors use for bandaging and stuff like that. Because that way I can get the knot out easily. Oops. If I want to adjust it, make it tighter or a little bit looser. So I've done it a little bit looser, and I'm going to just fluff it around like this by pulling on the elastic to see if I'm happy with that. And yes, that's great. Now I have a finished bowl cover, which is really nice, very neat on the inside, and honestly I would be so happy to receive this as a gift from somebody. So the basic premise with these is that the elastic needs to be tight enough that it stays on the bowl. It doesn't have to be too tight. You know, you're not going to get a fly that's going to be able to get under there. And if it goes in the fridge, as long as it stays on. I'm going to trim those ends off now that I'm happy the elastic is the right length. And I'm going to then just keep pulling it, and the elastic will probably, the knot will pop into that channel and be fully hidden. And there you have a really lovely cover for a bowl. Now, I've made this a different size to what I need for the pot, so I can't demonstrate it on the pot, but there it is. So that's another method. Now the final method I'm going to show you is for a Damkesh. You can make a Damkesh using any of the other methods I've shown you, and you can also do it using this method I have shown you here today. The difference with a Damkesh is that it has a toweling or a dish towel layer. So something that's nice and absorbent is what you're looking for. So we are going to pin, because we don't want our layers to move, because we've got 2 layers. I've got my toweling on the other side, and I've got my pretty cotton on this side. I'm going to hold it down so the 2 layers stay together while I'm sewing on my bias tape. And this is another method, but this method is using bias tape, but with no frill around there, because you don't have to have a frill on your pot if you don't want to. So this is just to show you that you can do it slightly differently using bias tape. So there I've got my layers pinned together. I take my bias tape and I'm going to, in this case, open up the one side, because your bias tape has got two folds towards the middle. I'm going to open up one side of that tape and I'm going to place it on the very edge of my Damkesh, and I'm going to pin it. I'm only going to pin it because I want to show you that you can, but you don't have to pin it all the way around before you start this. You can just put a few in to hold it as you get going. So there you go. I've got my bias tape opened up and butting up flush to the edge of my pot cover. I can now go to my machine on a straight stitch. I'm going to not start at the very beginning. I'm going to leave a centimetre or two. I'm going to start away from that edge because I want to tuck another edge under that to neaten it up just now. So I'll go into the groove. So where your fold on your bias tape was, that is what I'm aiming to sew in. So you're going to sew in that line where the tape was folded over. So this is a lovely practice for you to sew a perfectly straight line following the fold in this bias tape. This method is very nice for enclosing sleeves or a sleeveless garment like a tank top or something that doesn't have sleeves on it, and then you can edge your sleeve hole or your neck hole in the same method. So it's a transferable skill that you're learning today using making these pot holder covers. Pot covers. Damkesh if you're Iranian. Especially for my Abji. Abji is Iranian for sister. She introduced me to Damkesh and the wonders of Iranian rice cooking. I seem to have elastic running around with me. So follow the entire perimeter of your bowl cover. And don't do what I just did and go outside the lines. That's not ideal. There we go. We're getting back to the beginning now, where we're going to make it look nice and tidy. Continue around until you're almost back to the beginning, and then I want you to cut off your bias tape so it overlaps by about 2 centimeters with your beginning bias tape. Now I want you to open it up as if you're carrying on, fold it back on itself, and then unflap the beginning and cover the bit you're doing now. So what you're going to have is underneath your bias tape will be folded over, and then over here your bias tape will also be folded so that they butt up against each other and leave a hole for you to make a channel for your elastic to go through. If you're ever nervous about your fingers, get a little very pointy pair of scissors or a pen or something that you can hold underneath there. Go back over the beginning stitches just to anchor it nicely and pull it out and trim your threads. So that's how we've done the beginning. We've got these 2 pieces that have been folded over, and when we go back to the other side, you'll see it'll create a little hole for you to put your elastic through. Now what we're going to do is take our bias tape and fold it back over on itself to the wrong side, because we attached that onto the right side, and we're going to fold it all the way back. The entire tape will go back so that it's hidden under that edge of your fabric. Now you could, if you wanted to, and if you had wider tape, only do it halfway, and it creates a little channel like that for you. Bear in mind that unless you've got wide-ish tape, it will actually be a little bit more difficult for you to thread your elastic through. But it will work if you use a thin elastic or a wider tape. But for this demo, I'm going to fold it all the way back so that my tape is completely hidden on this side. Now, again, if you want, you can do that all the way around and pin it so that you have it pinned as you go. Just means that as you're going along, you do need to remove your pins before your foot or your needle gets to that position. So that's what you can do if you want to, is pin it before you sew it. Go back to the machine. Your design choice at this point, whether you use a straight stitch or a zigzag stitch to hold this in place. Whatever you do, bear in mind, this will show on the other side of your work. Now, when you're doing this, I'm using a little pin as I go because it will create little tucks every now and again in your bias tape. So we keep flipping it over, and I take the pin out, and then I use the pin to edge any creases that want to form in the tape. I push it downwards under the presser foot so that they get sewn neatly into position. So go along, stop every time you get to a pin or when you need to position your bias tape again. Take your foot off the pedal when you're not using the machine. It's a really good habit to get into because you do not want to be concentrating on something so much that your fingers are underneath the presser, underneath the foot or the needle, and you accidentally push down on your pedal and you ride over your finger. I'm sure that is not an experience any of us sewers want. There you go. I had a little tuck there almost. It didn't actually form a tuck because you can stretch the tuck out as you're going. There you go. Try and also get your needle into the down position so it's into the fabric before you do any manipulating, because that way your work won't slide out from under the foot while you're fiddling with the layers. So remember I said you could use this technique on a vest or a sleeveless garment? Well, this is exactly the same method you use. You attach your bias binding on the right side first, and then on the wrong side, you stitch it down. Once you've attached it on the right side, you flip it over to the back, and you can either hand stitch it down if you don't want to see it from the right side, or if you're not worried about seeing a row of stitches on the front of your garment, you can simply machine stitch it down. So we're coming back to the beginning now, and I want to make sure that my end is nicely tucked in and meets up with the starting stitches. So I'm going to put a pin gently there, and as my needle gets there, I'm going to remove the pin. Go over your starting stitches, and then you can take it off the machine. Just while you're looking at this, you can see actually this, you can make so many different things with this. This could be a trivet for your pot if you made it with something nice and thick. It could be anything really you like. So there we have it. I have now folded it over all the way around, and we now have a channel. And on this side, all you've got is the main fabric. You don't see any of that. What we're doing next is our final little step, exactly as we did for the other one. We take our bodkin and we're going to thread our elastic through the edge of this. Because of the toweling, it's going to be much thicker, so you may struggle a little bit more. Well, it's not a struggle, but it will be a little bit thicker and to get your bodkin through. So if you're using a safety pin, it's going to be wider than this bodkin I'm using, and so it might be a little more difficult for you to get it through. But just persevere, just go slowly, and it will eventually get through. One thing I can mention now that we've got to this point is that you can make these very pretty with lace edgings and all sorts. But just bear in mind that whatever you use needs to either be microwave safe, if that's what you're going to use it for when you reheat things, or that it is not going to melt if you put this on a pot and the pot gets really hot. So don't use anything that's got a high plastic content unless you've tested it first. So if you go and test it and it works fine, then fabulous, go ahead and use it. And there we have our Damkesh, which I'm just going to pull this elastic a little more, cut it off sort of where I think it needs to be. I'm going to tie my knot in it, and then we can even out the elastic in the channel, because you can see it's bunched up on one side, so we just even it out by pulling on it. Now I have a feeling that elastic is still too long, so that is going to jump off the pot if I try and put it over the pot now. There you go. It doesn't curl under the pot very well, so what I need to do is pull the elastic a little bit further and redo that knot so that we have a slightly tighter. And there you have it. And this is one of the reasons why I do it this method for a pot, because of the handles. You don't have much space between the handles and the top of your Damkesh, so you don't need a huge frilly piece. And what the Iranians now do is, once they've done this, is they cook the rice and then they allow it to dry by leaving it on the stove, either on a very low heat, I can't remember what Mariam did, or off, and then they allow it to be dried out by your Damkesh, the lining, which is your toweling or your very heavy cotton, to actually absorb the moisture. Now if I get to the lid, what they do is they then put the lid on top of that as well to give it, to keep the heat in. So you can see now the heat will stay in, but the moisture will get absorbed by the Damkesh. So there you have it, everybody. A whole lot of different methods for you to make reusable covers, which you can wash. So this is why 100% cotton is a really good product to use. You can make it into a Damkesh. For my Iranian friends, you can make it into bowl covers. And you can make it into a insect cover for a bowl or a cup. If you live in a warm country where the flies love to get into your teacup and things like that, you can make a lovely little cover for a teacup, and also for your jams. Remember that these would make a lovely gift. You could put coffee, tea bags, anything you like inside your mug, put a lovely little cozy over the top of it, and it makes a lovely little gift as well. So there you go, everybody, how to make various reusable covers for pots, bowls, mugs, etc. It's Michelle Nell MBE over at Hesketh Emporium, signing off and wishing you all a wonderful day. Bye.